and the DA. Tell us more about that.
Well, it is a new strategy, considering that after that Constitutional Court ruling last year, the DA pushed for a motion of no confidence. That, of course, failed. There was another one later in the year as well. That failed as well. And now we're seeing this new strategy, Julius Malema revealing in that interview that he has been in talks with the opposition leader, that is Mmusi Maimane, about them resigning, considering that the DA is the biggest opposition in Parliament. And then, of course, you have the EFF. And he believes that if you put both numbers together, from both seats together, from the EFF as well as from the DA, the numbers will be enough to have Parliament not meet a quorum, and then Parliament will have to dissolve. And of course, he says that they will then go to the Constitutional Court to get Baleka Mbete to dissolve Parliament. But remember that the other strategy that the EFF has employed on its side is that the EFF is going to the Constitutional Court, where it wants the Constitutional Court to force Baleka Mbete, in light of the Constitutional Court's ruling last year, to hold President Jacob Zuma accountable, that he failed to uphold, protect and respect the Constitution. We've seen what happened during SONA as well, the State of the Nation address. This is the EFF saying that they don't believe in President Jacob Zuma. They don't believe that he's fit to hold office. We've heard that from other opposition parties as well. And the EFF on their side have employed these other strategies, as well as not listening or being part of sessions where President Jacob Zuma is involved in Parliament. Those are some of the strategies. But now we see a new strategy in speaking to opposition parties, and in the interview also speaks about speaking to other members within the ANC who are not happy with President Jacob Zuma's leadership, and hopefully they will resign with the DA and as well as with the EFF to get Parliament to dissolve.
Now, very quickly, before I move into the other issues that Malema tabled in your interview with him, the dissolvement of Parliament, what would that mean for our democracy and the House?
It will be quite interesting how that unfolds, because it's never happened, well, not even in recent history. I can't even remember it happening during the apartheid era. But now, under our democracy, it will be very interesting to see how that's going to unfold. And as Julius Malema says, that this will no longer be the 5th Parliament, but it will be the 6th Parliament. And something else that we need to consider is that the Constitutional Court last year also made a ruling against the IEC, which found that the voters' roll that the IEC was using was not constitutional. It didn't meet the constitutional master. Now we need an IEC that will have to come in, step in, and make sure that the elections take place. That's when the president hypothetically then declares an election that must happen before 2019, whether the IEC will be ready to do that, considering that they have a voters' roll that is not ready, that doesn't meet constitutional master. But the IEC's deadline, per the Constitutional Court ruling, is that by 2018 April, if I'm not mistaken, they should have the voters' roll in order.
Other issues that Malema spoke about, the land issue and calls for Robert Mugabe to step down.
Let's first start with the land issue. That has been a big debate. Remember last week in Parliament, they pushed for motion that the Constitution, Section 25 of the Constitution, be dissolved. They believe that that section is a stumbling block in terms of accelerating land expropriation. However, though, they believe that what should happen is that the Constitution must say that land expropriation without compensation be allowed. And quite interestingly is that President Jacob Zuma actually agrees with this. Was it Friday last week when President Jacob Zuma was speaking at Operation Pakisa? He spoke about land expropriation without compensation. A couple of days later, when the motion by the EFF was being heard in Parliament, we saw the ANC caucus in Parliament, led, of course, by Jackson Mthembu, the Chief Whip of Parliament, opposing this motion from the EFF. The ANC's former Chief Whip, Tony Ngeni, tweeted and said that how could this have happened? The ANC must explain how black MPs or African MPs allowed for this to happen and not vote for expropriation of land without compensation. And later on in this week, where we heard President Jacob Zuma on Friday, if I'm not mistaken, when he was speaking at the opening of the House of Traditional Leaders, he was clear, and he actually made a plea, and he said, we call on all parties that deal with the majority black people to come forward, and let's create a majority that will allow the Constitution to be amended. If we must take these, if we want to change the Constitution, these are the strategies that we need to employ. And it's quite interesting that you have the ANC caucus in Parliament and the ANC leader, which is President Jacob Zuma, and also the President president of the executive, or the leader of the executive, speaking in two different tones. And of course, the one around Robert Mugabe. Remember that the EFF leader, Julius Malema, has always made this call that Robert Mugabe should step down. He even made these calls while he was president of the ANC Youth League. And when I was speaking to him during this interview, he said that it's time for the leaders, African leaders, to stand up against Robert Mugabe and tell him that he must go. Remember that Robert Mugabe hasn't been in power since 1980. That's a long time that he's been in power, and he hasn't wanted to relinquish power. When he responded to Julius Malema a couple of weeks ago, when Julius Malema made a similar call that Robert Mugabe should step down, saying, step down, old man, Robert Mugabe speaking at his birthday celebration, saying that, listen, the party, the ZANU-PF, decides when I should step down, and it's not a call that should be made by the Red Berets leader. And it will be quite interesting how Robert Mugabe responds this time, because now the call from Julius Malema is not just for Robert Mugabe to step down, but a call on African leaders to ensure that Robert Mugabe steps down, including SADC.
That certainly is a big issue. I mean, even his wife, Grace, came out to say he will rule even in his grave. It really is an issue with African presidents, also, you know, issues around Yahya Jammeh. But lastly, Aldrin, Malema, on his corruption charges, what has he said?
Yes, remember that Julius Malema was charged with corruption. If I'm not mistaken, there were about 50 or 56 charges that were facing at the time. And that stemmed from an investigation by Thuli Madonsela, the then public protector. It was on-point engineering. The findings from the public protector was that on-point engineering was involved in corrupt dealings. The tender was not awarded regularly by the Limpopo government, and the shareholders of On Point Engineering includes Ratanang Foundation, Ratanang Family Trust Fund, which of course Julius Malema is the trustee of, and the name of that fund is of course in Julius Malema's son, Ratanang. So the question that I posed to him is that whether he wants to see his name being cleared. Because when this case was taken to the Limpopo High Court, it was struck off the roll by the judge because the judge believed that the state wasn't ready to go ahead with the case. The state then made it clear that Julius Malema hasn't been acquitted by the court. However, though, the charges have been withdrawn, but it could be reinstated. Julius Malema believes that it was a political ploy, but he still believes that right now he is not guilty of anything. Him, as Julius Malema himself, is not guilty. But quite interesting would be how he deals with the issue around Ratanang being involved, or these findings by the public protector that the Ratanang Family Trust benefited improperly from the tenders of On Point Engineering.
All right, Aldrin St-Pierre, our political reporter. That is where I'll leave it with him, just giving us a couple of comprehensive answers into what took place when he interviewed the leader of the EFF, Julius Malema.